Hey everyone, welcome to week 2 of our series, Uncommon Life, Experiencing God Together. When we've embraced uncommon change and pointed our life toward Jesus, and when we live well in an uncommon kind of people in the direction of Jesus, we should expect an uncommon life. One of the ways that shows up is in the generosity we get to receive and express to others. Here we go. We started early in the summer with this series called Uncommon Change, and what you just saw is a big piece of that. That when you realize and acknowledge who Jesus is, you turn your life toward Him and you begin changing your mind and changing your life. You mark that in a moment called baptism, when we count on God's Spirit to come alive in us, to empower us to do all the things that He has called us to do. It's always His strength. It's always His initiative. It's always His support that causes change in our life, and so we point our life toward Him in an uncommon change. And we find ourselves among an uncommon group of people, 2 feet in, not 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but 2 feet in on some practices that we live out together that invite God and create space for Him to do powerful things in our life. We've been doing that for the last 6 weeks or so. I encourage you to catch up on that on the podcast or YouTube if you missed out on any of that. Because those practices set the stage for an experience of an uncommon kind of life, which is what we find ourselves talking about for the next several weeks. That when we have embraced that change, and when we have partnered in an uncommon kind of people committed to saying, yes, Jesus, what's the question? I'll say yes, tell me what the question is, and we find our way in His direction, this life experience with Him just changes. I want to show you again and again and again here in Acts chapter 2, and as we read, I want you to think about what must it have been like to be a part of a group of people described like the people that we're about to read about. It was just in the first months after Jesus had conquered death and resurrected. He said, listen, everything I said, I meant it, and I've just demonstrated with my resurrection the power to do everything I've said. And so they started saying, all right, how do we live this out? How do we live as God's people? How do we live as people who identify with Jesus? And there's this summary passage, like it describes their life as a whole in Acts chapter 2. And if you read on in Acts, and I would encourage you to, you'll just see story after story that are examples of this summary. But I want to show you again this summary in Acts chapter 2. We continue on in verse 44. It says this: all the believers met together in one place, and they shared everything they had. Remember, imagine the experience of this kind of shared life. All the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, and they met in homes for the Lord's Supper and shared meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. When we look in through the window at this summary, this guy named Luke, he was a doctor in the first century, and he interviewed all kinds of people who had experienced life with Jesus and was a part of this group of people. And he set out to write an orderly account. And so as he launches into the story of God's people, this summary passage is like, let me tell you what it was like. And as you listen in on that, man, doesn't that sound uncommon? That just does not sound like most people's life experience. That doesn't sound like a neighborhood where the doors go up and come down before anyone says hello, right? It doesn't sound like every man or woman for themselves. It's something very different. Did you notice how many times the word sharing came up in that passage? In fact, if you just read the next couple of chapters, you'll catch a few examples, but then by chapter 4, you'll see another summary passage. So if you're in your app, just scroll over. If you're in your Bible, flip the page. Acts chapter 4, verse 32, it says this: all the believers were united in heart and mind. If your KJV is one accord, they were like together. They were after something together. And they felt that what they owned was not their own. That little phrase right there, like shifting from whatever our common mentality in the United States is to that description, is a massive shift. They viewed the things that they had differently than most people do. The words mine and my didn't make sense to this group of people in the way that they lived. It says, they did not consider, they felt that what they owned was not their own. He goes on and he says this, so they shared everything they had. It just made sense. It's not mine, so why not share it? The apostles testified powerfully to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great blessing was upon them all. There were, catch this, no needy people among them, because those who owned land or houses would sell them and bring the money to the apostles to give to those who were in need. Now listen, these are the first two summary passages of what it was like to live out their faith just after Jesus had called them into this new family. When they said, Jesus, we're with you and we're with your people, this is how they lived it out. Why would they do that? Like, why such a communal, shared life? Well, it only made sense. It's exactly how they had lived with Jesus. If you sort back in this guy named Luke wrote a book of the Bible cleverly called Luke. It describes the life of Jesus. And in Luke chapter 8, we get this little window into how he and his friends and followers lived together. In Luke 8, it says when Jesus was going out to tell everybody, hey, this is what's happening, this is what it means, this is who you can be, this is how we can live together, and you'll believe it all after I've conquered the grave. He goes everywhere to tell everybody this. God is doing something new, and you're invited to be a part of it. But the reason he and his friends could do that, he and his closest followers, we call them the apostles or the disciples. Those sent ones is what apostles means, or learners is what disciples means. They lived closely with Jesus. But the reason they could do that, it says in Luke chapter 8, is that he took along not only those 12, but some women and many others who were, catch this, contributing from their own resources to support Jesus and his disciples. A common life is just what they experienced with Jesus, and so they carried that right into their faith and walked in that way as much as they could. Now, it did get a little complicated because a group of 12 with some women and others who were contributing, that's one way to share a life. In Acts chapter 2, we find that 3,000 get baptized, and all of a sudden now they're trying to figure out how to share life with thousands of people. That's harder. It continues to escalate along the way. There's some powerful stories I would point you to in the first chapters of Acts. You got to catch these. Just out of that passage in Acts chapter 4, Acts chapter 5, or right before it, we see a guy named Barnabas sell a field and bring the money to the apostles' feet and say, listen, whoever needs this, however we can provide for this new family we have, I want to do that. This group of people was so marked by giving and generosity that some people tried to impersonate them. Their life was so uncommon. Their life was so stark contrast from everything else people would experience that there were some impersonators. You should check it out in Acts chapter 5. It did not end well for them, but they thought they were so amazing they would try to portray themselves as this kind of amazing group of people. But no, it wasn't rooted in their hearts, and it did not end well. By Acts chapter 6, we catch this. As the believers rapidly multiplied, and this is always a characteristic of a healthy group of followers of Jesus. As the believers rapidly multiplied, there were rumblings of discontent. Can you imagine? Does anyone imagine at all rumblings? Does anyone have a family? That's all I'm asking. Does anyone know another human being? That's really where we're at right now. But listen, as you try to share a common life with thousands, it never goes conveniently. There's no clear map. They had to sort this out along the way and figure it out in each stage. So they were trying to provide for people, but it says the Greek-speaking believers complained about the Hebrew-speaking believers. He goes on and says, saying that their widows were being discriminated against in the daily distribution of food. Now listen, there were problems because there were people, but just catch this, they wanted to provide. They wanted to live out that summary passage. There were no needy people among them. Well, where did this food come from? From a people marked by giving. Now, some of you are reading the weather really well right now, and you're like, oh goodness, what are we talking about today? Who's excited to hear a large church pastor stand on a stage and talk about giving? Yeah, that's what I thought. But listen, the reason I've started the way that I've started is that the most common theme, the most words, the most regular appearance of a characteristic of these people in the two key passages describing their life together is all about generosity and giving. And a number of the stories that point to the example are consistently about giving. It is inescapable that the people who knew Jesus the best and shared life closest with him and sought to live that out in the Spirit were people who gave. Now, whatever you decide to do with that, you can decide to do with that. You and God and your people should decide together. But it's inescapable, it's unavoidable. It was a defining characteristic of followers of Jesus. There's no way to read any story about them without seeing this characteristic. And they didn't just give, they gave tangibly, meaning you could touch, taste, and feel. It was food distributed. It was fields sold. It was money arriving. You could touch it. You could taste it in the meals that they shared together with those who could provide the space and the resources to set a table so that nothing would hinder this family of God from celebrating God together. They brought what they had. Some brought a lot, some brought a little, but everybody brought a portion and said, listen, this is who we are. This family is important, so you could smell it, you could taste it, you could touch it, you could feel it all the way. It was very tangible. They also gave practically, meaning this was not some sort of sentiment or well-wish. This was action and practice. It was a habit that defined who they were, all the way to the point that people would impersonate it. And they gave sacrificially. It cost them something. It was not convenient. In fact, as you read on in the New Testament, you'll find that the most common pointed at story of giving was from an extremely poor group of people providing internationally for another church that they just heard was in hard times. This is what marks God's people. So yeah, we're gonna talk about giving. Now, if you're like me, in my conversations with God, I'm like, really? Right now? The way we decide what to talk about around here actually happens months in advance. And so did I know that inflation was gonna hit an all-time high? Did I know everyone was gonna be talking about the housing market and exactly where we're at in that right now? Did I know gas was gonna be over $5 and groceries are like incomprehensible at this point? Did I know that supply chain issues? No, not at all. But this is the beauty of God. As we just follow our way through the story of his people, he engages us in the right things at the right times. So let me just ask, is this really the wrong time to talk about money, or is this actually the best time to talk about money? I mean, all the rest of our culture is talking about money right now, but they're not talking with God's word in mind, right? All of us are experiencing this already on a daily basis, right? So listen, why wouldn't we take time right now to invite God to help us think well, to think biblically, to think with his spirit about how we deal with money? Now, before I go any farther, let me just say this. I know that like all of what happens immediately in us is like defensiveness, protectiveness, suspicion, and motives, and all that kind of stuff. When somebody with a microphone in a large room in an organization starts talking about money, that's not how we approach things around here. The way we approach things around here is we try to look at what God has said and say, what do you want to do about it? And where do you want to apply that? How will you start to live that out? What step will you take to give God more of who you are and watch how he provides for you in return? So listen, there's a reason we talked about giving earlier. The buckets aren't coming by again, okay? There's no second pass. There's no heavy-handed guilt trip coming today. That's not what we're talking about at all today. What we're gonna talk about today is why we give. And this is actually, like I said, the perfect time to talk about this. Because the nearness that giving and money has to our heart only reveals how deeply important it is to us and how sneaky it gets deeply into us. The emotions that come up to us, the defensiveness that comes about, the stress and anxiety that we see when we scroll the news and see the events that unfold, this only shows us how important it is to talk about this, and maybe especially right now. What it does in us is important, but also what it can do among us. Because imagine a group of people living in this financial climate with a deep sense of peace, confidence, and generosity. That would be an uncommon kind of life that would tell the world something very different than the world often assumes about the people of God. This is the perfect time for us to step into this. And the way we live generously with the people in our lives, our faces and our places, actually has more potential impact right now because of what they are experiencing and feeling than maybe any other time in the last decade. The opportunity is so clear. It's the perfect time to talk about what God has in mind for us and the things that he has entrusted us with. So that's what we're gonna do. Now, I told you, we're not gonna have a heavy-handedness in any way, shape, or form. We wanna equip people to look at what God has said, to put it into practice, and to share it with others. So one of the best ways we know how to do that is to offer you some great questions and some scriptures that you and your people can look at together. So here's what I wanna encourage you to do. Send a text, uncommon, to 94000. Yes, I'm gonna talk for a little bit. Yes, we're gonna teach each weekend about how God helps us view money well. But the best thing you can do is sit down with the Bible open, some people you trust, listening well to God and asking him, what's my next step? The best way for you to find that is to send uncommon to 94000 or take a picture of that. It's gonna go to the same link. Let me tell you what you're gonna find there and what you're not gonna find there. What you're gonna find there, first of all, is just this little quiz. It is totally not statistical in any way. It's just supposed to stir up some questions about how you think about money. At the end, you'll have the opportunity, but not the obligation, to enter your email. If you do that, you're gonna get a 13 or 14 page, 1 week study that day by day asks you different questions about money. You can do it over 7 days, 14 days, whatever pace works for you, without any obligation whatsoever. But I think it's a phenomenal resource to help us in this climate think through, God, how do you want me to live now, especially with the things you've entrusted me with? So listen, take the short quiz. It'll show up in your text here in an hour, or you can find it at the website, and then download the resource. It's a journey worth taking and conversations worth having with God. All right, so let's do this today. As we launch out, today I only want to explore one simple question about giving. I don't want to talk about where we give. I don't want to talk about how we give. I only want to talk about why we give. Because if we give for the wrong reason, it's not going to have the effect God desires for it to have in our heart. What is it that God has in mind when we give, and why should we think about taking what he has entrusted us with and giving it away in his name? Well, my first answer is this. The why question is actually a who question. When we think about why to give, we should be thinking about who in 3 different ways. Number 1, we should think about who we are. And what we think about who we are will affect how we give and what we do with our stuff. We should think about who Jesus is, and what we do with our stuff will reveal what we really think about Jesus. And we should think about others. All of these are in the passages I've already pointed out in Acts, along with some things Jesus said. Let me show you along the way. Number 1, quickly, how you view you will affect how you view money and things. What you think about who you are and your place in the world will absolutely affect what you do with your money and your stuff. Because if life is all about me, then of course, all of what I have and whatever I can get my hands on is about me. I'll be at the center of that. Or suppose you're here and you don't believe there is a God. You don't think Jesus is trustworthy, has anything to do with you. Well, of course you would think that all of what giving would make no sense to you at that point. What would be the motivation whatsoever other than maybe to feel good? Right? No. If it's about me, then my stuff and my money is about me. If it's actually my effort and my ability that helps me earn things, then that's my stuff. It's my money to do what I want with, right? How we view ourselves is totally influential on how we think about what we do with our money and our stuff. But people who identify with Jesus don't think that about themselves. You see, while the rest of the world thinks that you need 100% of your money and 7 days a week to live a good life, God clearly says you really only need 6 days a week and 90% of your money. And I can do more with that, God says, than you could ever do with all of it. And the reason we think that is when we identify with Jesus, we realize we've been rescued, we've been bought. When we were totally hopeless, he rescued us in the deepest parts of who we are. And if we can entrust him with our identity, if we can entrust him with our eternity, then certainly we can trust him with our money in the meantime and explore and experiment trusting him more and more and more in every way we know how. In Acts, these people identified with Jesus. They said, look, you can raise from the dead. We'll believe anything you have said. Let's just try everything you have said. Let's live in any way we can. And they found Jesus constantly giving. So if they identify with Jesus, why wouldn't they be that sort of person? They realized their value was not found in money. It was found in him and his rescue. They realized their hope was not in money. It was in him. They identified with him in baptism, and the Spirit alive in them and among them caused them to say, whoa, I actually don't need all of this. I can live differently. Where your identity is will determine how you think about money and stuff. And when our identity is more and more in Jesus, it's less and less in money. When our identity is more and more secure and final and firm in Jesus, it is less and less in money. I know there is always a tension and anxiety when we go to take something that God has entrusted to us and give it to someone else. And it's in that exact moment we willfully choose to trust God instead of ourselves. That we lean on him and recognize, I'm not my own, I'm his. I don't rescue me, he rescued me, right? And Jesus said, you'll live in this tension and navigate this your whole life. He says, no one can serve two masters, no one. No one can serve two masters. You will hate one and love the other. Which if we find ourselves really resistant to give to other people, we really have to question who our master is. If you will hate one and love the other. You'll never want to talk about it because our love, even though we don't want to name it, is somewhere else. He says, you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. You can't serve God and be constantly thinking and worried about money. You can't serve God and constantly be consumed with checking bank accounts and charts that go like this or anything else. We can't live that way. You cannot live in two directions at once. And it seems, as you look, I hope you'll read the story of the first believers, it seemed that money served their master rather than becoming it. In the United States, money just feels like everybody's master most of the time. I need more. I need a little bit more. If you ask the world, how much is enough? Their answer is, guess what? A little bit more. 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 It's a carrot on a stick or a hamster on a wheel, and all it leads to is tired. But Jesus says, no. Listen, I got you. You can't serve two masters. Serve me, trust me, I'll carry you. I got you. I'm for you. Right? So we don't look at, if you look at what all the world is saying about money, you'll be stressed out, freaked out, and you'll think you need to hoard every single thing that you have because the market's gonna crash and costs are going up and blah, 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 as if money rules the world. But listen, these people, money served their master, which is why it constantly found its way into other people's hands, and they experienced an uncommon kind of life. They weren't always just givers. At times, they were recipients, and this is the beautiful thing about being in a family. Is it an action that we do or an experience that we find ourselves in? I think the answer is yes. Listen, Jesus helped them find a different way to live. You cannot serve two masters. If Jesus is the center of our lives, that will show up regularly and increasingly as we both spend our money in his name and give our money in his name to other people. And what Jesus really did for us is give us a totally different view, not just of ourselves as we take on his identity, but a different view of him. Because how you view Jesus will also affect how you view money and things, and vice versa. How you treat money and things actually reveals what you really think about Jesus. We can say whatever we want to say, but the proof is in the pudding. Right? This is what Jesus said. He said, listen, don't worry about these things. This is Matthew chapter 6. Don't worry about these things, saying, what will we eat? What will we drink? What will we wear? These things dominate the thoughts of who? So let's just take an inventory of our thoughts these days. As everyone in the world is talking about money, what is dominating our thoughts? And if these kinds of things, where I'm gonna shop next, what I'm gonna purchase next, did I take full advantage of Amazon Prime Day, whatever it is that we might be thinking about, no shame, deals are deals. I love a good deal. But these things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers. Let's not take on that tag. How we view Jesus will view how we view things. He says, your heavenly Father already knows all of your what? Maybe not all your wants, but all of your needs, all of them. What loving father doesn't provide for his children? And if we're afraid he's not gonna provide, what we're really thinking is, I'm not sure you really love me. What we think about Jesus is revealed in how we treat our things. He says, do what the first believers did. Seek first the kingdom of God above everything else. Jesus as master, money as means, serving the same master we do. And live righteously, and he will give you. It doesn't say he might. He doesn't say sometimes. He says he will give you everything you what? Okay, listen, right? Do we trust Jesus? Because he said, I'll give you everything you need. I knew it before you did. How freeing is that? Like, if that's who Jesus really is, how freeing is that? When everyone else is sprinting and scurrying and striving and overworking and under-resting and totally anxious and stressed out, Jesus says, I got you, calm down. Will it require some discomfort at times? Yeah. Will we live in some tension and ambiguity at times? Of course. Those are beautiful opportunities for Jesus to show us exactly who he is and how he carries us through those moments. We'll ask this kind of question no matter what our financial circumstances. Some of us are in places where we're like, literally, I don't know how to make ends meet and the bills are piling up. There are no choices left. All I have is needs and I don't have enough. God can meet you in that. I hope we can support you in that. We got to think, do we need a different perspective? Do we need some different tools? Do we need some help along the way? There's ways to navigate that. You'll be thinking about this. All of us have to navigate money. It's a reality. We just want it to come underneath the leadership of Jesus. On the flip side, there are people who arrive at seasons in their life where the questions I've sat across the table and asked with them is, how do I know where to give? Right? They've come to that place where they do have an abundance. At the same time, though, listen, all of it has to do with this verse, kingdom value. This is how my friend puts it, kingdom value. Where can I put money in its place so that Jesus gets named king in my life and everyone around me? We'll always be wrestling with this question, he says, of how much is enough? He says, I know some of the richest people on the planet and they will never have enough and they'll be miserable to the end. At some point, we all decide how much is enough. And while the world says just a little bit more, that's a lie. Jesus says, I got you. So we have to look at Jesus and not the world, because if we look at the world, we'll just feel like crazy people. And they'll look at us like we're crazy people. But that's because they don't see themselves the way we see ourselves, as bought with a price, protected forever, in his hands, in his family. And they don't see Jesus the way we do, as the one who promised to provide and has never failed yet. So of course they're gonna think differently. Don't be surprised when the news doesn't read like your faith. The world thinks we're on our own, but we're not. Listen, here's the beautiful thing. When our security is more and more in Jesus, it's less and less in money. When our identity is in him, it's less and less in money. And when our security is in him, it's less and less in money. Security in money is a farce. It's not true. It promises what it can't deliver. And finally, not only how we view ourselves and how we view Jesus, but how we view others will absolutely affect how we view money and things. Over and over and over, it seems like the things that God had entrusted the first believers with made its way into the hands of others. Why would they do that? Why do that? If Jesus says, I got you, I'll provide for you, give a portion to me, how do you give to God? He doesn't need anything. Psalm 50, one of my favorite verses, it says, listen, I own the cattle on 1,000 hills, God says. If I needed something, I would not ask you. He needs nothing. How do you give to someone who doesn't need anything? Or how do you give to someone who's impossible to give to? This is a hard example, but very quickly, we have this practice around here, it seems, in our country, and certainly it shows up often at our church, where when someone we deeply loved and shared life with passes on, we find ourselves at a memorial service. And we want to honor their memory, right? Because of all the gratitude we have for experiencing life with them. Well, we can't give to them, so what do? We give to some sort of cause that meant a lot to them, don't we? Are you familiar with this practice? We give to what matters to them. That's really simple, yeah? You give to the thing that they gave to. So if you were gonna give to the thing that God gave to, who would you give to? His people, the ones that he loves. Listen, we always do this. You give to the thing that they gave to. So they gave to others because they viewed themselves as in God's family, and they viewed everyone around who had pointed their lives toward Jesus as part of that same family. Do you give well to your family? If you look across your finances, wouldn't you say you give maybe most freely to those that you love? That gets a fresh and new definition when we step in Jesus' direction. In fact, as you exit here in a little bit, or if you're brave, take a look around at the risk of awkward eye contact. There's a way in which this is our family, and certainly on a smaller scale, those we share life with in our neighborhoods, in our places, the people in our groups that we invite to discover Jesus together, these are our family. And so if we want to give to God, these are some of the first places that we give. Because how we view us, how we view Jesus, and how we view others all affect how we give. And loving Jesus will always mean prioritizing people over possessions. Just read the life of Jesus. Find yourself in Matthew 25 along the way. You cannot separate loving God from loving people. He will separate people who told the truth or just said what they thought he wanted to hear by how they treated the people he loves. Jesus and people simply can't be separated, so we view others as family. So listen, all of this has to do with how we see things. When we see Jesus as king, when we see ourselves as his, and when we see others of his as family, money and things take their rightful place in our lives as a means and not as an end. As tools and instruments, both to enjoy and honor God and to express our love by spending and giving in the interest of others for those that he loves. And here's the promise that we see modeled in Acts chapter 2, and I think we see across the scripture, that we will experience God together when we give to him and to others. You want to see more of God's work in your life? Start taking what he has entrusted to you and give it away in his name. The more you give, the more you'll experience him. You'll see it all the way across the scripture. I think part of why they lived in awe and why they constantly praised, you'll see this in Acts chapter 2, the kind and character of their life was so deeply connected and rooted in giving that I don't even know if they could separate it from an action that they intentionally pursued or an experience that they received. It was all tangled up as both. This is the beauty. That when we see ourselves rightly with Jesus, when we see who he is and actually act what we believe in trusting him to provide for us, when we take what he has given us and put it in the lives of others with surprising generosity, care, freeness, lightness, and peace, we encounter him in fresh ways. God says, look at what I can do when you entrust your money and things back to me. I gave it to you to begin with. It came from me. The breath in your lungs came from me. The effort that you gave, the time that you have, the job that you have, the way you came to things, I gave it to you. And if you'll just give me a small portion back, God says, by putting it in the lives of other people, he'll shape and change our hearts in his direction. He says, I can do that. And he says, I'll bring help in the lives of others that point their lives toward me and call them alive in me. And when you do it, I will connect you to in such a powerful way that could not be experienced any other way than you showing up generously in the life of another person. This is what God can do with every small amount we'll put in his direction by placing it in the lives of people that he loves. It's like this friend of mine who told a story. It's just life bringer around here. Just asked the question, tell me a story about a time you gave. This is her story. She said, I was filling up gas, and a man was asking people for $5 to help get home with his wife. You've experienced this, right? All the questions and suspicions and hesitations. She said he wasn't getting much of a response from others at the gas station. So I gave him $20. This person in the previous said she keeps some money in the console of her car just for moments like this. I love she's prepared, she's available. So she gave him $20 and said, God bless, and she went back to whatever it was she was doing, filling up gas or whatever. And at that moment, she felt like she needed actually to do more, to actually fill up their car all the way, which means a lot these days. What do you say? Said, I learned long ago that feeling is God saying, listen up, I have something I want you to do. So she went over and she explained that she would fill up the car if they would just pull over near hers. So this guy, Charles, happily did that. And while he did, she started a conversation with his wife, Mary, and found out this, that she was just released from the hospital. They lived almost an hour away. She knew they didn't have gas to get home, and so she had just then been sitting in her car praying to God to help them find a way to get home. Just imagine the experience. The availability of some cash in a console, the attentiveness to what God invited them to do. Right? She said, listening to the small voice and obeying that day has led to becoming prayer partners with them, and occasionally will join their church's prayer meetings online since that day. She said, if I had ignored it, I would have missed a blessing. God has good in mind for us. He lacks nothing. He only wants for us what he has always imagined in this uncommon kind of life. We experience God connecting us more and more deeply to him and to one another. In fact, my friend Tom said it this way: I've learned that I might not be worldly rich, but the Lord has blessed me with more than I need, and when I give it away, my life is richer. There's so many Christians who could tell those stories. If you're sitting next to somebody who follows Jesus, throw an elbow and let them tell you a story on the way out of how God showed up and connected them to others when they gave in his name. If you want to experience an uncommon life, you want to experience God more in your life, give more. Take what he has entrusted to you. Start with a small portion. Take a next step and give it away in his name. You'll find over and over and over that he meets us in that kind of experience. So I had some reflection questions for you. I'm not going to give you. I'm going to trust you to download the thing that we asked you to download. If you really want to explore this, if God is stirring in you to say, I have a step for you to take, I'm inviting you forward. I really encourage you to take that link and find your way into that. Have some conversations. But listen, we honor God when we give to what matters to him. So let's be that kind of people. Let's experience him more and more as we give more and more to others, faces and places, and the people around us in his name. What we think about Jesus, what we think about us, and what we think about others all influence what we do with our money and things. Let's keep letting Jesus tell us what to think in all of those directions, and let's keep expressing that in the way we give to others. We'd love to help you keep discovering. Text UNCOMMON to 94000, and you'll get some resources to figure out where you're at on a path toward being generous like Jesus. If there's any other way we can support you, we would love to. Head over to canyonridge.org, where you'll find everything you need to know, along with the way to get a hold of us. If this was helpful to you, I hope you'll share it with a friend, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you soon.